The autumn of 1879 painted the Dakota Territory in breathtaking hues of amber and gold, but inside the dilapidated Miller homestead, darkness prevailed. As the last rays of sunlight filtered through cracked windows, Elizabeth Miller, the eldest of three sisters, carefully counted the meager coins hidden in her mother's old tea tin. $23.42, all that stood between them and starvation since their mother's passing 3 months prior. At 22, Elizabeth had become mother to her younger sisters, Catherine, 19, with her quiet determination and skill with medicinal herbs, and Rebecca, just 16, whose artistic talents and gentle spirit provided rare moments of beauty in their harsh existence. Their father, Harold Miller, once a respected merchant in Boston, had deteriorated into a cruel, gambling drunkard after their mother's death, disappearing for days before returning to demand what little money the sisters had scraped together. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sisters never spoke of how they had come to this remote corner of the Dakota Territory, how their father had fled Boston after embezzling from his business partners, how their mother had withered away from both illness and heartbreak in this unforgiving land, how they had once been daughters of privilege, educated and refined before disgrace had exiled them to this brutal frontier life. "Lizzie," Rebecca called from the window, "Father's coming, and he's not alone." Elizabeth quickly hid the tin behind a loose floorboard as Catherine gathered Rebecca close. The thundering of multiple horses approached, unusual for their father, who typically returned alone, stumbling from his horse in a whiskey-soaked stupor. When the door crashed open, Harold Miller stood flanked by 2 expensively dressed men. His bloodshot eyes held a triumphant gleam that Elizabeth had learned to fear. "Girls, show some respect," Miller slurred. "Meet Mr. Augustus Parker and Mr. William Crawford, owners of the Black Eagle Mine, most successful operation in the territory." Elizabeth noted the way both men surveyed them, not as people but as merchandise. Parker, the older of the two, had a face weathered by sun and ambition, his silver-streaked beard neatly trimmed against his expensive suit. Crawford was younger, perhaps 35, with cold eyes that lingered too long on Rebecca. "Fine-looking girls, Miller," Parker remarked. "Educated, you say?" "Finishing school back east for the older two," Miller boasted, as if he'd provided this luxury rather than their mother's family. "Youngest is a natural at figures and drawing." "Unusual refinement for this territory," Crawford added, circling Catherine slowly. "And you say they can cook, clean, manage household accounts?" Elizabeth stepped forward. "Father, what is this about?" Miller's expression darkened. "These gentlemen require wives. The territory's growing. They're building proper homes now, need proper women to run them." "We're not for sale," Elizabeth stated firmly, though her stomach tightened with dread. Parker laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Spirited, that's good. The last one Crawford had was too meek, died within a year." "The last one?" Catherine whispered, her face paling. "Mining life is hard on delicate constitutions," Crawford replied with a dismissive wave. "But you girls look sturdy enough." Elizabeth positioned herself protectively before her sisters. "We won't be separated." "Don't need all 3, Parker shrugged. "I'll take the oldest. Crawford fancies the little one. Middle girl can go to Jameson at the Silver Crown operation." "He's looking too." "No!" The word exploded from Elizabeth with such force that even her father flinched. Miller grabbed her arm, fingers digging painfully into her flesh as he pulled her aside. "Listen here," he hissed, alcohol fumes enveloping her. "I owe these men more money than you'll see in a lifetime. They've agreed to clear my debts in exchange for you girls. It's done, Elizabeth. Papers signed this morning." "You can't sell your own daughters," she protested, though in her heart she knew the terrible truth. In this remote place, with no law but men's agreements, perhaps he could. Already have, Miller replied, releasing her arm. You leave tomorrow. Pack your things. After the men departed, the sisters huddled together in the small bedroom they shared, speaking in whispers. We have to run, Rebecca sobbed. Tonight. With what money? To where? Catherine asked, ever practical despite her fear. Winter's coming. We wouldn't survive a week. Elizabeth paced the small room. The mining camps are death traps for women. Once there, we'd never escape. Parker and Crawford have private security, men who enforce their will, and this Jameson might be even worse. I heard stories in town, Catherine said quietly, about Crawford's last wife. They say she didn't die. Of consumption at all. Rebecca's eyes widened with horror. Then what? Enough, Elizabeth interrupted, unwilling to burden her youngest sister with such darkness. We need a plan. As moonlight spilled through the window, Elizabeth made her decision. We'll take what money we have and head north toward the Pembina settlement. We have an old school friend there. The sound of breaking glass interrupted her. Their father's angry voice carried from the main room, followed by unfamiliar voices. The sisters froze, listening. Changed my mind, Miller. Crawford's voice, no longer smoothly controlled, but rough with drink. Why wait till morning? I want to see what I'm buying tonight. Elizabeth quickly pushed her sisters toward the window. Go now. Head for the creek bed. Stay in the water to hide your trail. We won't leave you, Catherine insisted. I'll delay them, then follow. Elizabeth promised. Rebecca, take the money tin. As her sisters reluctantly slipped through the window, Elizabeth grabbed her father's old rifle from beneath the bed, unloaded, but they wouldn't know that. She positioned herself before the bedroom door, just as it crashed open. Crawford stood there, face flushed with whiskey and anger. Behind him, their father swayed unsteadily. Where are the other two? Crawford demanded. Safe from you, Elizabeth replied, raising the rifle. Crawford laughed. That old thing hasn't fired in years. He stepped forward confidently. Father sold. Us once today, Elizabeth said coldly. Curious he'd allow you to claim your property early, without additional payment. The words had their intended effect. Crawford turned suspiciously toward Miller. Is she telling the truth? You trying to double-cross me? As the men argued, Elizabeth edged toward the window. Her sisters would need her. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, but they would never submit to being sold like cattle to these cruel men who saw women as disposable possessions in their empire-building ambitions. She slipped through the window into the cold night air, heart pounding. The vast Dakota sky stretched overhead, stars offering meager light as she ran toward the creek where her sisters waited. Behind her, angry shouts erupted from the house. Elizabeth knew the territory's harsh realities. 3 women alone faced nearly impossible odds of survival. But as she reached her sisters, and they embraced tearfully, a new sound reached them. Horses approaching, not from the direction of their home, but from the north. Someone's coming, Catherine whispered. The sisters pressed together in the shadow of a large cottonwood, watching as 5 riders materialized in the darkness. Their silhouettes were distinctive, not the rigid postures of mining company men, but the fluid grace of those who lived in harmony with their mounts. Lakota, Rebecca breathed. Elizabeth tightened her hold on her sisters. The Lakota's relationship with white settlers had deteriorated as broken treaties, and the discovery of gold in their sacred Black Hills had led to increasing conflict. But these riders weren't moving with the urgency of a war party. As moonlight illuminated their faces, Elizabeth was struck by the youngest rider, perhaps no older than 20, whose keen eyes scanned the creek bed and locked directly on their hiding place. They've seen us, she whispered to her sisters. Stand tall, show no fear. The sisters rose together from their hiding place as the riders approached, uncertain whether they'd fled one danger only to encounter another in the unforgiving Dakota night. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The 5 Lakota riders formed a semicircle before the Miller sisters, their horses standing eerily still in the moonlight. The leader, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s with twin eagle feathers tied into his long black hair, raised his hand in a gesture of peace. "You run from something," he said in accented but clear English. It wasn't a question. Elizabeth, still positioned protectively before her sisters, lifted her chin. "Our business is our own." The leader studied her face, his expression revealing nothing. "2 more men come," he stated simply, gesturing back toward the Miller homestead. "Angry men, with guns." Sure enough, the sounds of pursuit reached them. Shouting, the crash of undergrowth, Crawford's distinctive voice calling threats into the night. The youngest Lakota rider, the one who had first spotted them, spoke rapidly to the leader in their native language. Though Elizabeth couldn't understand the words, the urgency was clear. The leader nodded once, then addressed Elizabeth again. "I am John Thunder Eagle. These are my brothers." He indicated the others with a sweep of his hand. "We offer help." "Why would you help us?" Catherine asked, suspicion evident in her voice. John's expression darkened. "We know these mining men. What they do to the land, to people." A gunshot cracked through the night, far too close. Rebecca flinched, pressing against Elizabeth. "Please," Elizabeth said, "decision made. We accept your help." With swift efficiency, each sister was lifted onto a horse. Elizabeth found herself seated behind John Thunder Eagle, while Catherine and Rebecca were placed with his brothers. The youngest Lakota, introduced as Benjamin Thunder Eagle, led Rebecca's horse with particular care. "Hold tight," John instructed, and then they were moving, the horses navigating the darkness with surprising speed and silence. They rode north along the creek bed for nearly an hour before turning east into a densely wooded area that would have been impossible to traverse without the Lakota brothers' intimate knowledge of the terrain. Eventually, they emerged at a small clearing where a modest cabin stood, smoke curling from its chimney. "Our trading post," John explained as they dismounted. "Between worlds, safe for now." Inside, the cabin revealed an unexpected blend of cultures. Traditional Lakota items, beautifully crafted quill work, painted buffalo hides, shared space with American furniture and books. A woman with intelligent eyes and silver-streaked black hair greeted them in the Lakota language. "Our aunt, Mary White Feather," John explained. "She speaks no English, but understands more than she admits." The aunt assessed the sisters with a penetrating gaze before nodding and directing them to sit by the fire. She brought them steaming cups of a fragrant herbal tea, which Catherine identified as willow bark and mint after a cautious sip. As the brothers conversed in low tones near the door, Elizabeth finally asked the question that had been pressing on her mind. "Why do you have this place? A trading post so far from any settlement?" Thomas Thunder Eagle, the middle brother who appeared to be in his late 20s, answered, "Our father was half French trader, half Lakota. He taught us to move between worlds. When settlers came, he said knowledge would be our protection. Our father taught us to hunt and track," added Michael, the 4th brother. "Our Lakota grandfather taught us our traditions. Our aunt taught us to read and write English." Benjamin, the youngest, approached hesitantly, addressing Rebecca directly. "You're injured." He gestured to a scratch on her arm from their hasty escape through the window. Rebecca looked surprised, having hardly noticed it in the chaos. "It's nothing." Mary White Feather appeared with a small clay pot containing a green paste, which she applied to Rebecca's scratch with gentle efficiency. "Our aunt knows healing plants," Benjamin explained, his eyes lingering on Rebecca's face with undisguised fascination. As the initial tension eased, the sisters explained their situation, their father's gambling debts, the sale to the mining barons, their desperate flight. John's face hardened as he translated for his aunt. These mining men, Parker, Crawford, Jameson, they destroy everything they touch, the land, the water, the people. You've had dealings with them before, Elizabeth observed. They tried to claim our grandfather's land last year, Thomas explained. When papers and threats failed, they sent men with guns. What happened? Catherine asked. A smile ghosted across Thomas's face. They discovered that Lakota shadow warriors still exist. Mary spoke up then, her words translated by John. These men believe they own the earth and everything on it. They collect beautiful things without caring for them, land, gold, women. We aren't the first, are we? Elizabeth asked quietly. Other women have been acquired by these men. John and Thomas exchanged a look before John answered. 3 Cheyenne sisters last winter, 2 Swedish immigrants in spring. We've heard stories of others. And what happened to them? Catherine pressed, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. The Swedish girls died of fever. Within months, Michael said gently. The Cheyenne sisters disappeared. Crawford claimed they ran away. Rebecca shuddered. And you think that would have been our fate? No one needed to answer. Later, as the sisters settled onto pallets near the fire, they whispered among themselves. Can we trust them? Catherine asked, ever practical. They risked themselves to help strangers, Elizabeth replied. That counts for something. Benjamin seems kind, Rebecca murmured, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Elizabeth smiled, despite their dire circumstances. Rebecca had always responded to beauty and kindness, finding it even in the harshest situations. We'll need to move on tomorrow. These mining men won't give up easily. Father signed actual papers. Where will we go? Catherine's question hung in the air. Pembina is still our best option, Elizabeth decided. It's further north, outside the mining company's influence. We have enough money to start over if we're careful. Catherine nodded slowly. The Prescott family might take us in until we find our footing. Sarah Prescott and I exchanged letters until last year. Their whispered conference was interrupted when John approached, crouching nearby to avoid startling them. You should know, he said quietly, my brothers followed your pursuers. They returned to the mining camp, but they're organizing a larger search party for morning. They're offering rewards for your return. How much time do we have? Elizabeth asked. They'll begin at dawn, moving in expanding circles from your homestead. John's expression was grave. We can help you reach Pembina, but it will take time. 3 or 4 days if we avoid main trails. Elizabeth exchanged glances with her sisters. Why would you risk so much for us? John was silent for a long moment. Our grandfather taught us that all things are connected. What happens to the land happens to the people. These mining men poison both. The simple truth in his words resonated with Elizabeth. During their 3 years in Dakota Territory, she had watched the pristine landscapes transformed by mining. Operations, forests cleared, streams diverted and muddied, wildlife driven away. The same operations that brutalized the land seemed to breed brutality in the men who ran them. We'll leave at first light, she decided. John nodded approvingly. My brothers and I will guide you. Mary will remain here. This place must appear normal if searchers come. After he departed, Rebecca whispered, the youngest brother, Benjamin, he draws, like me. He showed me sketches of eagles in flight, Catherine smiled. I noticed Thomas watching you, Lizzie, not like Crawford did. Different. Elizabeth brushed aside her sister's observation, though she had indeed noticed Thomas Thunder Eagle's thoughtful gaze. We focus on reaching safety. Nothing else matters now. Yet as she drifted towards sleep, Elizabeth found herself reflecting on how quickly life could change course. Yesterday, they had been 3 desperate sisters trapped by their father's cruelty. Tonight, they had unexpected allies and a path forward, tenuous though it might be. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the distant howl of a wolf. Mary White, Feather, still awake by the dying fire, looked up sharply. She moved to the window, scanning the darkness as if reading messages in the night. Her expression grew troubled as she added another log to the fire. The coming days would test them all in ways none could yet imagine. Dawn broke in a watercolor wash of pink and gold over the eastern horizon as the Thunder Eagle brothers prepared for the journey. James, the second eldest brother, who had remained mostly silent during the previous night's events, now took charge of organizing supplies with quiet efficiency. "We travel light," he instructed the sisters as he handed each a small pack. "Take only what you need." Elizabeth noted how differently the brothers dressed this morning. Gone were any obviously native elements that might draw unwanted attention. Instead, they wore the practical garb of frontier hunters and trappers. Only eagle feathers tied discreetly into John and Thomas's hair hinted at their heritage. Mary Whitefeather embraced each sister before their departure, pressing a small leather pouch into Catherine's hands. "Medicines," John translated as his aunt spoke. "She says you have the knowledge to use them." Catherine appeared surprised. "How does she know?" "She saw how you identified the tea last night," Benjamin explained. "She says you have the healers." Outside, Michael returned from scouting, his expression grim. "Riders from the mining camp, 8 men heading this way. They're following our trail from last night." "How is that possible?" Elizabeth asked. "We were careful." "Harold Miller is with them," Michael replied. "Your father knows this area well." Elizabeth's heart sank. Of course her father would join the search. His gambling debts wouldn't be forgiven if the sisters escaped. His very survival depended on their capture. John issued rapid instructions. "Thomas, take the sisters north through Pine Creek Ravine. James, Michael, Benjamin, and I will create false trails, then meet you at Broken Hawk Ridge by sunset." "Before anyone could argue," he continued, "Thomas is our best pathfinder. You'll move faster with fewer people." Within minutes, they were moving through the forest, Thomas leading the 3 sisters in single file. They kept to rocky ground when possible, crossed streams repeatedly, and used every trick Thomas knew to obscure their trail. Elizabeth, struggling to keep pace with Thomas's confident stride, finally asked, "How did your family come to settle?" "Here, between worlds, as you call it." Thomas glanced back, his expression softening slightly. "Our father, William Thunder Eagle, was a translator during the treaty negotiations 20 years ago. He saw what was coming and prepared us for it." "By teaching you both worlds' ways," Elizabeth observed. Thomas nodded. He said, "We must be like water, able to flow around obstacles, to freeze or evaporate, to wear away stone through persistence." "And your mother?" Catherine asked from behind. A shadow crossed Thomas's face. "She died when Benjamin was born. 12 winters passed." They traveled in silence after that, moving steadily northward through increasingly rugged terrain. Around midday, Thomas led them into a narrow ravine where a swift creek tumbled over moss-covered rocks. "We rest here," he announced, indicating a small clearing beside the water. 15 minutes only. While the sisters gratefully sank to the ground, Thomas scaled a nearby outcropping to survey their back trail. "Your brother Benjamin," Rebecca said quietly to Catherine and Elizabeth. "He told me their Lakota name is Wakinyan Tanka, Thunder Eagle in English. Their grandfather was a respected medicine man." "You learned much in a short conversation," Elizabeth observed with a hint of sisterly teasing. Rebecca blushed. "He speaks softly but says much." Thomas descended and joined them, accepting dried meat from his pack that he shared among them. "The mining companies," Elizabeth began, accepting her portion. You said they tried to claim your grandfather's land. How did you stop them? Thomas studied her for a moment before answering. We showed them that paper laws aren't the only laws. You fought them? Catherine asked, concern evident in her voice. Not with bullets, Thomas replied. With knowledge. The mining operations depend on supply routes, water access, laborers willing to work. All these can be disrupted. Elizabeth understood immediately. You've been sabotaging them. A ghost of a smile touched Thomas's lips. We prefer to think of it as restoring balance. Further conversation halted when Thomas suddenly tensed, head tilted as he listened intently. Without a word, he motioned for them to gather their things and follow him deeper into the ravine. The sisters moved swiftly, following Thomas's silent directions as he led them through a narrow fissure in the rock wall. The passage opened into a small cave, hidden completely from the main ravine. "Stay here," he whispered. "No sound." Thomas disappeared back through the passage, moving with such fluid grace that he seemed to melt into the stone itself. Huddled together in the damp darkness, the sisters listened. After several breathless minutes, they heard what Thomas had detected. Voices echoing against the ravine walls, the clink of metal, horses' hooves on stone. "Spread out," a harsh voice commanded. "Crawford, they can't be far. Miller swears they headed this way." "The hell would they come up here for?" another voice grumbled. "Nothing but wilderness for 50 miles. "Found something!" a third voice called. "Fresh tracks by the water!" Elizabeth's heart hammered so loudly she feared it might betray their position. Catherine gripped her hand tightly while Rebecca pressed against her other side, trembling slightly. Sounds of the search party grew more distant, moving upstream as they followed whatever trail they'd discovered. Just when the sisters thought it safe to breathe again, footsteps approached their hiding place. Thomas slipped back through the passage. "They found one of the false trails my brothers laid. It leads away from our route." "How did you know this?" "Place existed?" Catherine asked as they emerged from the cave. "Our grandfather showed us every hiding place in these hills," Thomas replied. "During the last war with the U.S. Army, these caves sheltered our people. They resumed their journey, now moving with even greater caution." Thomas set a grueling pace, clearly intent on reaching their rendezvous point before nightfall. By late afternoon, exhaustion weighed heavily on the sisters. Rebecca, the youngest and smallest, struggled visibly. Without comment, Thomas lifted her onto his back and continued walking as if he carried nothing at all. "I can walk," Rebecca protested weakly. "Save your strength," Thomas replied. "The hardest part comes next." The hardest part proved to be a steep ascent up what appeared to be an unclimbable ridge. Thomas showed them handholds and footholds, invisible to untrained eyes, helping each sister navigate the treacherous climb. At the summit, Broken Hawk Ridge offered a commanding view of the surrounding territory. The mining operations were visible. To the southwest, ugly gouges in the earth, denuded hillsides, streams running cloudy with tailings. "There," Elizabeth pointed, "Parker's men are returning to the camp." Thomas studied the distant riders through narrowed eyes. "They've abandoned the search for today. They'll resume tomorrow with more men." "How can you possibly know that?" Catherine asked. "Because that's what I would do," Thomas replied simply. "They'll bring trackers from other mining camps, offer larger rewards." The first stars were appearing in the eastern sky when John and his brothers materialized from the forest below, climbing swiftly to join them on the ridge. "We led them on a fine chase," Michael announced with evident satisfaction. "Parker's men went 10 miles west. Crawford's headed east. And father?" Elizabeth asked quietly. "Returned to the mining camp with Crawford," James reported. "He looked unwell." Elizabeth felt conflicting emotions, concern for the broken man who had once been a loving father, before drink and desperation had twisted him, and relief that he was no longer directly pursuing them. John surveyed the group. We've gained a day, maybe two, but our journey to Pembina is just beginning. As night fully claimed the sky, the brothers constructed a minimal camp, a small, smokeless fire in a rocky hollow that would never be visible from below. James produced dried meat, berries, and cornmeal cakes that they shared equally among the group. Benjamin sat beside Rebecca, sketching in the dirt with a stick. "This is Eagle's Pass," he explained, showing the route ahead. "Here, we leave Dakota territory. Beyond is less controlled by mining interests. And more dangerous in other ways," John added. "The boundary between nations means little to those who live outside all laws." Elizabeth caught Thomas watching her across the fire, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. When their eyes met, he didn't look away. Instead, he moved to sit beside her. "You should sleep," he said quietly. "Tomorrow we'll test your strength again." "Will we make it to Pembina?" she asked, too exhausted for pretense. Thomas was silent. "For a moment. I believe you will." Something in his phrasing troubled Elizabeth. "You say you, not we." Thomas gazed out over the darkened landscape. "The mining men have made this personal. Once you're safe, my brothers and I have unfinished business with them." Elizabeth suddenly understood. "You're using our escape as cover for something else." A smile briefly illuminated his stoic features. "You see much, Elizabeth Miller." As the fire burned down to embers, Elizabeth watched her sisters, Catherine deep in conversation with Michael about the medicinal plants of the region, Rebecca showing Benjamin her small sketchbook that she'd somehow kept safe during their flight. Despite their dire circumstances, they had found moments of connection. Elizabeth wondered what awaited them in Pembina and whether they were traveling towards safety or simply a different kind of danger. The Thunder Eagle brothers had proven themselves allies, but their mysterious agenda suggested complexities Elizabeth couldn't yet unravel. Above them, the Milky Way stretched across the night sky like a river of stars, constant, ancient, indifferent to the human dramas playing out beneath its light. The second day of their journey brought them into terrain unlike anything the Miller sisters had ever encountered. The forested hills gave way to stark, wind-swept plateaus, where ancient rock formations stood like sentinels against the vast Dakota sky. Eagles circled overhead, their piercing cries echoing across the empty landscape. "Eagle country," John Thunder Eagle explained as they paused atop a high ridge. "Sacred ground to our people." The group traveled in a different formation today. John and James took the lead, with Michael ranging far ahead as scout. Thomas guided Elizabeth directly behind his brothers, while Catherine and Rebecca traveled with Benjamin at the rear. "You're surrounded," Elizabeth observed to Thomas. "You've placed us in protective positions." Thomas nodded appreciatively at her perception. "The mining companies have informants throughout the territory. Not all dangers announce themselves with gunfire." As they descended into a narrow valley, Elizabeth noticed Catherine deep in conversation with Michael, who had temporarily rejoined. The main group, her normally reserved sister, was animated, pointing to various plants along their path. "Your sister has knowledge of plants that surprises Michael," Thomas commented, following Elizabeth's gaze. "He's our family's medicine keeper." "Our mother taught Catherine," Elizabeth explained. "She believed every woman should understand healing arts." "A wise woman," Thomas said simply. They made good time throughout the morning, stopping only briefly at a clear spring to refill water skins. By midday, they reached a curious formation where massive boulders created a natural shelter beneath an overhanging cliff. "We rest here," John announced. "James has gone ahead to ensure our path remains." "Clear!" As they settled beneath the overhang, Benjamin produced small portions of pemmican, a dense mixture of dried meat, fat, and berries that provided remarkable sustenance for its size. Elizabeth noticed how carefully he ensured Rebecca received her share before taking his own. "Your brothers seem to know exactly where we're going," Elizabeth said to Thomas as they ate. "This isn't a route you created for our escape. You've traveled it before." Thomas studied her for a moment before answering. "This path connects sacred sites of our people. It's also used by those who wish to move unnoticed by territorial authorities." "Smugglers?" Catherine asked, joining their conversation. "Some call them that," John interjected. "Others might say they're people moving goods without paying unjust taxes to a government that claims land it never rightfully acquired." Elizabeth considered. "This and these traders have helped your family." "We help each other," Thomas clarified. "Information, safe passage, occasional sanctuary." Their rest was interrupted when James returned, his normally composed expression troubled. "Riders ahead, not mining men, boundary runners." John frowned. "How many?" "6, heavily armed, camped at Thunder Basin, directly in our path." The brothers exchanged glances that communicated volumes without words. "Who are boundary runners?" Rebecca asked quietly. Benjamin's youthful face hardened. "Men who hunt people for bounties, escaped prisoners, army deserters, runaway wives, anyone with a price." "Would they know about us?" Elizabeth asked, her stomach tightening with fresh anxiety. "If Crawford and Parker have spread word of a reward, they might," John answered grimly. "They have contacts throughout the territory." "Can we go around them?" Catherine suggested. James shook his head. "Not without adding 2 days to our journey. The only other passage north requires crossing open country where we'd be visible for miles." John considered their options. "We must face them directly. Better to confront the danger than flee into worse terrain." "Face them?" Elizabeth repeated, incredulously. "There are 6 armed men waiting to capture or kill us." "Not waiting," Thomas corrected. "They don't know we're coming. That gives us the advantage." John outlined a plan so audacious that Elizabeth initially thought he must be joking. The sisters would approach the boundary runners' camp openly, escorted by Thomas and Benjamin, presenting themselves as a legitimate travel party. Meanwhile, John, James, and Michael would position themselves strategically around the camp. "These men respect 2 things, strength and profit," John explained. "We'll offer them both." "What if they recognize us from descriptions?" Catherine asked. "They won't," Thomas assured her. "Boundary runners avoid mining company business, too many complications. They prefer straightforward bounties." "And if they decide we're worth taking anyway?" Elizabeth pressed. John's expression was coldly confident. "Then they will discover why the Lakota were the most feared warriors of the plains." They approached Thunder Basin as dusk gathered, the massive depression in the earth still luminous. With the day's fading light, the boundary runners' camp was visible from the rim, 6 horses picketed near a large fire where men lounged, passing bottles and playing cards. Thomas and Benjamin had transformed their appearance yet again. Now they wore the clothes of prosperous frontier traders with visible firearms and confident bearings. The sisters had been instructed to follow their lead precisely. "Remember," Thomas murmured as they descended toward the camp, "you are my wife Elizabeth. Catherine and Rebecca are Benjamin's sister and betrothed. We are traveling to Catherine's wedding in Pembina." Elizabeth nodded, struggling to calm her racing heart. The boundary runners noticed their approach immediately, hands moving to weapons before recognizing the deliberate, unthreatening pace of their visitors. "Hail the camp," Thomas called when they were within earshot. "We seek to share your fire for the night." The largest of the boundary runners, a bearded man with a scar bisecting his left cheek, stood to greet them. "State your business, travelers." "Nathan." "Reed." Thomas introduced himself with a slight Eastern accent, entirely unlike his normal speech. "My wife Clara. My brother Samuel with his sister and betrothed. We journey to Pembina for the lady's wedding." The scarred man studied them suspiciously. "Dangerous country for women, hence our armed escort," Thomas replied easily. "We've goods to trade for the privilege of your fire." This offer visibly interested the boundary runners. Trail supplies, especially liquor, tobacco, and ammunition, were valuable commodities in this remote region. The leader gestured them forward. "Let's see your trade, then." Thomas produced a small pouch, revealing tobacco of a quality rarely seen on the frontier. A sample of our goods. The negotiation that followed demonstrated Thomas's remarkable ability to adopt another persona entirely. He haggled with good-natured determination, eventually securing their right to camp nearby in exchange for tobacco and 2 small bottles of whiskey. Elizabeth maintained her silence, as instructed, but observed the boundary runners carefully. These were dangerous men. Their eyes constantly assessed value and vulnerability. Their conversation deliberately revealed nothing of their business or destinations. Most concerning was the youngest member of their party, who watched Rebecca with undisguised interest. The groups maintained separate fires, though close enough for conversation. Thomas played his role masterfully, sharing just enough information to seem forthcoming while revealing nothing important. Benjamin remained protectively near Rebecca, clearly aware of the young boundary runner's interest. "Wedding in Pembina, you say?" the scarred leader asked during a lull. "Strange timing with winter approaching." "My brother-in-law is impatient," Thomas replied with a conspiratorial smile, and the lady's father was equally eager to see the match formalized. Elizabeth tensed at the mention of fathers, but the boundary runner merely laughed. "Ain't that always the way? Fathers happy to hand off their daughters." As darkness fully claimed the basin, the boundary runners grew increasingly intoxicated on their newly acquired whiskey. Their conversation became coarser, their gestures more expansive. The young one's attention to Rebecca grew bolder. "Pretty little thing," he called across the space between camps. "Too good for a half-breed trader." Benjamin's expression remained neutral, though Elizabeth saw his hand tighten on his knife. Thomas intervened smoothly. "My brother's betrothed is tired from our journey. We'll retire now." The young boundary runner stood unsteadily. "Maybe she'd prefer company with real men tonight." The tension crackled like lightning in the air. Elizabeth saw Thomas's hand move subtly toward his pistol. Before the situation could escalate, an owl's call sounded from the darkness. 3 hoots in rapid succession. The boundary runner's leader instantly grew alert. "Someone's out there!" Another owl call from the opposite direction. The scarred man cursed, drawing his pistol. "We're surrounded." "Not by us," Thomas said calmly. His fabricated accent dropped entirely. "Though I suggest you reconsider your companion's interest in my brother's woman." The young boundary runner's face contorted with rage. "You lying—" His words died as an arrow thudded into the ground at his feet, quivering with deadly promise. The "Next one finds your heart," came John's voice from the darkness. The boundary runners froze, suddenly understanding their precarious position. "We mean no trouble," Thomas continued, his voice now carrying the unmistakable authority of a man accustomed to command. "We'll be gone by dawn. But understand this, these women are under our protection. Any man who threatens them tonight will not see tomorrow's sun." The scarred leader, calculating odds even through his whiskey haze, slowly lowered his weapon. "No quarrel with you, stranger." My man spoke out of turn. Elizabeth listened to this exchange with growing amazement. The Thunder Eagle brothers had transformed a potentially deadly confrontation into a grudging truce through perfect coordination and absolute confidence. As the boundary runners retreated to their side of the basin, Thomas whispered to the sisters, "Sleep in shifts. Dawn comes early, and we leave before first light." Under the vast, starry sky, surrounded by danger yet somehow protected by these remarkable brothers who moved between worlds with such fluid grace, Elizabeth finally allowed herself to contemplate what she had begun to feel for Thomas Thunder Eagle. Admiration blossoming into something deeper and entirely unexpected. Whatever awaited them in Pembina, She knew with certainty that her life and her sisters' lives had been irrevocably changed by their encounter with the Thunder Eagle family, a change that had nothing to do with escape and everything to do with discovering strength she hadn't known she possessed. They departed Thunder Basin in the grey pre-dawn light, moving with hushed urgency. The boundary runners remained in their bedrolls, either genuinely asleep or wisely pretending to be. Only their leader watched through slitted eyes as the sisters and their protectors vanished into the mist. John set a punishing pace. "We must put distance between us and the basin," he explained during a brief water break. "Those men will be curious once they're fully awake." Elizabeth noticed the brothers had reverted to their most vigilant formation, John and James ahead, Michael ranging to the sides, Thomas guiding the sisters, and Benjamin watching their back trail. "Do you think they recognized us?" Catherine asked, voicing the fear that had kept Elizabeth awake most of the night. "Not as the Miller sisters," Thomas replied, "but as valuable women traveling with Lakota men. That's reason enough for their interest." The landscape changed dramatically as they journeyed northward. The stark plateaus gave way to rolling hills covered in tall grass that rippled like water in the strengthening wind. By mid-morning, they reached the banks of a wide, fast-flowing river. "The North Fork," John announced, "boundary between territories." Elizabeth studied the churning water with apprehension. "How do we cross?" "There," John pointed upstream where the river narrowed between two rocky outcroppings. "The Stone Sisters Crossing." James had already begun unpacking lengths of rope from his gear. "We build a line to steady ourselves. The current is strong, but the water only reaches chest height at its deepest." While the brothers prepared for the crossing, Rebecca approached Elizabeth with unusual solemnity. "Lizzie," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something about Benjamin." Elizabeth felt a flutter of concern. Her younger sister had always been impressionable, and she'd noticed the growing attachment between Rebecca and the youngest Thunder Eagle brother. "What is it, Becca?" "He told me about the mining companies, what they've really done to the Lakota people." Rebecca's gentle face reflected deep distress. "It's so much worse than we knew." Elizabeth glanced toward Benjamin, who was helping Michael secure the guide rope. "What did he tell you?" "The Black Eagle Mine, Mr. Parker's operation. It sits on land that was their grandfather's sacred prayer ground. When the mining company found silver there 3 years ago, the territorial authorities simply took it." Rebecca's voice trembled with indignation. "Their grandfather protested, so Parker's men beat him. He died from his injuries a month later." Elizabeth felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. "Benjamin told you this?" Rebecca nodded. "Last night, while you were speaking with Thomas. That's why they've been disrupting the mining operations. It's not just sabotage, it's justice." Before Elizabeth could respond, Thomas called that the crossing was ready. The revelation would have to wait. Crossing the North Fork proved even more challenging than Elizabeth had anticipated. The rushing water pulled mercilessly at her legs, the smooth river stones treacherously unstable beneath her feet. Only the guide rope and Thomas's steady hand prevented her from being swept downstream. Catherine struggled halfway across, losing her footing on a submerged boulder. Michael reacted instantly, securing her against his body while they regained the rope. Elizabeth noticed her sister's face flush with more than exertion as Michael guided her to shore. Rebecca, the smallest and lightest, faced the greatest difficulty. After watching her struggle against the current, Benjamin simply lifted her onto his back and carried her the remaining distance, his powerful frame barely affected by the rushing water. Once safely across, they paused to dry their clothes as best they could. The late October sun provided little warmth, and Elizabeth worried about the risk of illness from their sodden garments. Thomas addressed this concern without being asked. "There's a trapper's cabin 2 hours north. We can rest there and dry properly." As they resumed their journey, Elizabeth found herself walking beside John while Thomas scouted ahead. "Rebecca told me about your grandfather," she said quietly. John's expression remained impassive, but his eyes flickered with something, pain or anger, perhaps both. "Benjamin shouldn't have shared that story," he replied. "Why not? Don't we deserve to know why you're really helping us?" John studied her for several strides before answering. "We're helping you because it's right. The rest is our burden, not yours." "But it explains much," Elizabeth persisted. "Your knowledge of the mining operations, your determination to undermine them. This isn't just about helping 3 women escape. You're fighting your own war." A hint of a smile touched John's lips. "Thomas said you see more than most." "Are we part of your strategy against the mining companies?" Elizabeth asked directly. "Originally? Yes," John admitted. "Your escape creates confusion, diverts resources, damages their reputation. But now—" He glanced toward his brothers, each attentive to their assigned sister. "Now, I think our motivations have become more complicated." Elizabeth followed his gaze, understanding the implications. The connection between the sisters and brothers had evolved beyond strategic alliance into something none of them had anticipated. "What happened after your grandfather died?" she asked gently. John's face hardened. "The mining companies expanded. More land taken, more sacred sites destroyed. Our people were pushed further from ancestral grounds. Those who resisted disappeared or died in accidents. And no one in authority helped? The authorities?" John's laugh held no humor. "The territorial judge owns shares in Parker's company. The U.S. Marshal drinks with Crawford. This is the frontier, Elizabeth. Law is whatever those with power say it is." Elizabeth considered this bitter truth. In Boston, her father had moved in circles where law meant something, or had appeared to, until his own crimes revealed the preferential treatment wealth could purchase. Here in the territories, the pretense of justice seemed even thinner. "The trapper's cabin," she said, changing topics. "Another ally of yours?" John nodded. "Jacob Holloway, former Army scout who married a Crow woman. Another man between worlds." They reached the cabin by early afternoon, a sturdy structure nestled in a grove of cottonwoods near a small tributary. A tall, weathered man with a grey-streaked beard emerged at their approach, rifle ready until he recognized John. "Thunder Eagle," he called in greeting. "Unexpected company." "Holloway," John replied. "We seek brief sanctuary." The trapper surveyed the bedraggled group, his keen eyes noting the sisters' eastern bearing despite their disheveled state. "Mining company business?" he asked. "In a manner of speaking," John answered. Holloway nodded once. "Then you're welcome. Wife's away visiting her people, but there's stew in the pot and space to dry by the fire." Inside, the cabin revealed a fascinating blend of cultures. Cured animal pelts hung alongside intricate beadwork. Trapping tools shared space with traditional Crow artifacts. European books rested on shelves next to parfleche containers. "Your wife is Crow, not Lakota," Catherine observed to Holloway as he served them bowls of rich venison stew. "Do your peoples not have historic conflicts?" The trapper smiled. "Tribal boundaries mean little in a world where all natives face the same threat. Morning Sky and I understood that before most." As they ate, Holloway shared news that caused the brothers to exchange concerned glances. Crawford's men passed through. 3 days ago, he reported, asking about 3 sisters traveling north, offering substantial rewards. 3 days ago? Thomas frowned. "That's not possible. We only escaped 4 days past, and they were searching in the wrong direction." "Unless they anticipated your route," Holloway suggested, "or someone informed them." Elizabeth felt a chill. That had nothing to do with her damp clothes. How would they know we'd head for Pembina? "Perhaps they don't," James spoke up from his position by the window. Perhaps they're simply blocking all northern routes, Holloway nodded thoughtfully. They've certainly been thorough, checking every settlement, posting men at river crossings, unusually determined even for Crawford. What aren't you telling us, Mr. Holloway? Elizabeth asked, sensing the trapper's hesitation. Holloway studied her appraisingly before responding. Crawford's been telling people these sisters stole something valuable, something irreplaceable. That's absurd, Catherine protested. We took nothing but our mother's jewelry and our own clothing. There's more, Holloway continued reluctantly. He claims one of you killed a man during your escape. The sisters stared at him in shock. That's an outright lie, Elizabeth said firmly. We harmed no one. Someone did, Holloway replied. Crawford's foreman was found dead the morning after your departure, shot in the back. The implications hung heavily in the room. Crawford wasn't just pursuing runaway property, he was hunting alleged murderers. In frontier justice, such accusations rarely required evidence, particularly when directed at women in the company of native men. As the sisters absorbed this disturbing news, Benjamin returned from checking their back trail, his expression grim. Riders coming from the south, he announced. Moving fast, 6 men heavily armed. The boundary runners, Thomas concluded. They must have recognized the sisters after all. Holloway moved with surprising speed for his age, grabbing extra ammunition and a second rifle from a cabinet. There's a root cellar beneath the floor, he said, pulling back a rug to reveal a trapdoor. Won't hold all of you, but the women at least. John shook his head. We can't involve you in this, Holloway. I involved myself when I married Morning Sky, the trapper replied evenly. Choose quickly. They'll be here within minutes. As the brothers conferred rapidly in Lakota, Elizabeth made her own decision. Pulling Catherine and Rebecca close, she whispered urgently, We can't keep running forever. These men won't stop, and we're putting the Thunder Eagles in increasing danger. What are you suggesting? Catherine asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. Elizabeth straightened her shoulders. It's time we fought back in our own way. We're not helpless Boston girls anymore. For the first time since their desperate flight began, Elizabeth felt something beyond fear and gratitude, a burning determination that their pursuers would soon discover was every bit as dangerous as the Thunder Eagle's arrows. No root cellar, Elizabeth announced firmly to the Thunder Eagle brothers. We won't hide while you risk yourselves for us again. Thomas looked as though he might argue, but something in Elizabeth's expression stopped him. What do you propose? He asked instead. We use their expectations against them, Elizabeth replied, her mind racing through possibilities. These men see us as helpless women, valuable property to be claimed. Let's show them otherwise. Holloway's weathered face broke into an unexpected grin. I like your thinking, miss. Reminds me of Morning Sky. With the boundary runners approaching rapidly, they devised a plan that relied on surprise and misdirection rather than direct confrontation. Holloway's cabin, built with the wariness of a frontier survivor, offered strategic advantages, multiple exits, defensible positions, and carefully placed windows that allowed those inside to observe anyone approaching. Boundary runners work. For profit, not passion, Holloway explained as they prepared. Show them this job isn't worth their trouble, and they'll seek easier prey. Catherine, who had remained quiet during the planning, suddenly spoke up. I have something that might help. From her medicine pouch, she extracted a small packet of dried leaves. Stinging nettle and devil's club. When burned, the smoke causes severe eye irritation and confusion. Michael looked at her with newfound respect. How do you propose we use it? Place it near the chimney, Catherine explained. When they surround the cabin, add it to the fire. The smoke will pour out both the chimney and any cracks in the cabin walls. Anyone close will be temporarily blinded. Perfect, Elizabeth nodded. That gives us our advantage. They worked swiftly, Positioning themselves throughout the cabin, the sisters refused to be sequestered in the back room as initially suggested. Instead, Elizabeth stationed herself near the front window with one of Holloway's spare pistols. Catherine prepared her makeshift smoke weapon by the fireplace, while Rebecca, to everyone's surprise, volunteered to act as visible bait. "They're expecting to find frightened women," she explained with uncharacteristic steel in her voice. "Let them see one, then learn their mistake." Benjamin, clearly uneasy with this plan, nevertheless helped position Rebecca near the front door, where she would be visible through the window, apparently alone and vulnerable. Within minutes they heard horses approaching. Holloway peered carefully. Through a crack in the shutters, 6 men, just as Benjamin reported, the scarred leader from Thunder Basin and his crew. Rebecca took her position, arranging herself to appear frightened and alone. The rest concealed themselves throughout the cabin, John and James at the rear exit, Thomas and Benjamin covering the side windows, Michael with Catherine near the fireplace, and Elizabeth crouched beneath the front window, pistol ready. The boundary runners approached with the casual confidence of men accustomed to easy victories. Their leader dismounted first, signaling 2 others to circle around back, while the remaining 3 approached the front door. "Trapper!" the scarred man called. "We've business with your visitors." When no response came, he gestured to his companions. "Check the windows." One man approached the front window, where Rebecca huddled visibly, his face lit with predatory satisfaction. "Got one of the sisters here, boss?" "Looks like the youngest." The leader grinned. "Excellent. Flush her out." As the boundary runner raised his pistol to break the window, Rebecca suddenly looked directly at him, with an expression that was anything but frightened. The man hesitated, momentarily confused by her transformation. "Now!" Elizabeth shouted. Catherine tossed her prepared herbs onto the fire, which instantly belched thick, acrid smoke through the chimney and the cabin's strategic openings. Simultaneously, Thomas and Benjamin fired warning shots that splintered wood inches from the boundary. Runners' positions. The confusion that followed unfolded exactly as they'd hoped. The boundary runners, expecting easy prey, found themselves under attack from multiple directions while choking on the disorienting smoke. 2 men stumbled blindly, rubbing streaming eyes. Another fired wildly toward the cabin, his shots going wide. From the rear of the cabin came shouts as John and James engaged the men who had circled behind. Elizabeth heard the distinctive sound of fists connecting with flesh, followed by a heavy thud. The scarred leader, more experienced than his men, managed to dive for cover behind a water trough. "It's a trap!" he shouted. "Fall back!" Elizabeth seized the moment. Rising from her position, she leveled her pistol at the water trough and fired a precise shot that sent splinters flying just above the leader's head. "The next one finds your skull," she called out, her voice steady and authoritative, a tone she had never used before her life on the frontier. "We have no quarrel with you unless you make one. Leave now." For several tense heartbeats, the outcome hung in balance. Then the leader's voice came from behind the trough, strained but calculating. "What about our payment? Crawford's offering 500 for the 3 of you." "Crawford murdered his own foreman and blamed us," Elizabeth replied. "The bold lie. Blowing easily. He'll likely kill you too once you deliver us. Save the hassle." A pause followed this declaration. Elizabeth could almost feel the leader reassessing the situation, outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and now presented with the possibility of betrayal by his client. "Keep your distance and don't pursue us," Elizabeth continued, pressing her advantage. "Do that and you live. Follow us, and the next time we won't be so merciful." From the rear of the cabin, John and James emerged with a boundary runner between them, unconscious and bleeding from a head wound. They unceremoniously dragged him into view of his companions. "Your man will recover," John announced. "Consider him a gesture of good faith. Take him and go." The scarred leader finally emerged from behind the trough, hands raised in grudging surrender. "This job just lost its appeal," he muttered. Crawford didn't mention anything about Lakota warriors, or women who shoot like soldiers. Elizabeth maintained her aim as the boundary runners collected their injured companion and retreated to their horses. Only when they had ridden well out of range did she lower the pistol, her hands suddenly trembling with the aftermath of tension. "You did well," Thomas said quietly beside her. "Most men would have faltered under that pressure." "I surprised myself," Elizabeth admitted, studying the weapon in her hand with a mixture of pride and disbelief. Inside the cabin, Catherine was already tending to James, who had sustained a knife cut during the brief struggle at the rear door. Rebecca stood by the window, watching the boundary runners disappear into the distance, her face reflecting a newfound confidence. Holloway surveyed the minimal damage to his cabin with a philosophical shrug. "Been meaning to replace that shutter anyway." "They won't return," John stated with certainty as he cleaned his knife. "They know a bad bargain when they see one." Elizabeth considered their victory. "We've solved one problem, but Crawford's accusation of murder changes everything. We can't simply disappear into Pembina now. We'll be hunted throughout the territories. We must clear your names," Thomas agreed, "which means we need evidence of who really killed Crawford's foreman. The only way to get that is to go back." Elizabeth realized the enormity of the idea settling over her. "Back?" Catherine looked alarmed. "To the mining camp?" "Not directly," Thomas clarified, "but close enough to investigate. We have allies, miners who resent Crawford's methods, townspeople who fear him but might speak if protected." "It's too dangerous," Benjamin protested, looking at Rebecca. "More dangerous than being hunted as murderers for the rest of our lives," Elizabeth countered. "If we reach Pembina with this accusation hanging over us, we'll never be safe, never be free." A lengthy discussion followed, with arguments for continuing northward versus turning back to confront the false accusation. Throughout, Elizabeth noticed a subtle shift in the dynamic between the sisters and brothers. They were no longer simply protectors and protected. They had become partners in a shared struggle. By dusk, a new plan had taken shape. They would continue to Pembina as planned, but along a route that would bring them within range of Silverton, the settlement nearest Crawford's mining operation. There, Thomas and Elizabeth would seek evidence to disprove the murder accusation, while the others prepared a safe haven in Pembina. "We leave at first light," John decided. "The boundary runners have given us a brief reprieve, but Crawford's men will not be far behind." As the others prepared for the journey, Elizabeth found herself alone with Thomas on Holloway's small porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in crimson and gold. "You're not who I thought you were when we first met," Thomas observed. "Nor are you?" Elizabeth replied. "I believed you were wild savages, and you thought I was a helpless Eastern lady." Thomas smiled faintly. "We were both wrong. Yet here we are, planning to confront one of the most powerful men in the territory with nothing but determination and hope." "We have more than that," Thomas said quietly. "We have truth, and each other." The simple statement lingered between them, laden with meanings neither was yet ready to fully acknowledge. For now it was enough to stand side by side, watching the darkness gather over the frontier that had shaped them both in unexpected ways. Inside the cabin, Rebecca sketched by lamplight, not the delicate flowers and landscapes of her Boston days, but detailed drawings of Crawford, Parker, and the boundary runners, faces of men who would recognize them, men they needed to avoid or confront. Catherine and Michael sorted through Holloway's herb stores, preparing medicinal packets for the journey ahead, their hands occasionally brushed, each contact followed by quick glances and subtle smiles. The journey that had begun as a desperate flight was transforming into something entirely different, a mission of justice that none could have anticipated. When they fled into the darkness 3 nights earlier, dawn broke over Holloway's cabin with a pink-gold light that belied the gravity of the decisions made the previous night. The trapper had risen early to prepare provisions for their journey: dried venison, corn cakes, and a special tea blend that Catherine had helped create from his herb stores. "This route will take you northeast through Swift Creek Pass," Holloway explained, tracing the path on a crude map spread across the table. "It's longer than the direct trail to Pembina, but keeps you on high ground with good visibility." John studied the map intently. "And Silverton? How do we approach without being seen?" Holloway indicated a forested ridge. "Miners' cabins cluster here, at the settlement's edge. Crawford's office is central near the assay building. Best observation point is this ridge, close enough to watch but outside regular patrol routes." Their plan had evolved during the night. Rather than splitting the group immediately, they would travel together to a sheltered valley 3 miles from Silverton. From there, Thomas and Elizabeth would venture into the settlement to gather information while the others established a secure camp. 2 days only, John had insisted. "If you find nothing by then, we proceed to Pembina and seek legal means to clear your names." As final preparations were made, Elizabeth noticed Catherine speaking intently with Michael near the cabin's rear door. Her normally reserved sister had changed subtly over the past days, more confident, more willing to voice her opinions. Now she watched as Catherine handed Michael several small packets, likely medicinal preparations from her work the previous evening. "She's found her match," Rebecca observed quietly, joining Elizabeth. "Perhaps," Elizabeth acknowledged, "though these are hardly normal circumstances for courtship." Rebecca's expression grew serious. "Nothing about our lives has been normal since Father's disgrace. Maybe this is our chance to build something true from all the falsehood." Elizabeth regarded her youngest sister with surprise. The naive girl who had left Boston was vanishing, replaced by a young woman with unexpected wisdom. "What about you and Benjamin?" Elizabeth asked gently. A blush colored Rebecca's cheeks. "He sees things others miss. Not just tracks and signs, but beauty in small moments. Last night he showed me how to listen to the wind through pine needles. Each species makes a different song." Before Elizabeth could respond, Thomas approached, his expression unusually solemn. "A moment, Elizabeth." They walked a short distance from the cabin, stopping beneath a massive cottonwood. Thomas seemed to struggle with his words, unusual for a man normally so composed. "What we attempt at Silverton," he finally said, "involves considerable risk." "I'm aware," Elizabeth replied, "but necessary." "Yes, which is why—" He hesitated, then continued with quiet intensity. "Should something happen to me, you must promise to continue to Pembina. Your sisters need you." Elizabeth studied his face, the strong lines, the watchful eyes that had guided them through countless dangers. "And if something happens to me," she countered. A shadow crossed his features. "That is not a possibility I'm willing to consider." The simple declaration hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was prepared to fully express. Their departure from Holloway's cabin was efficient and swift. The trapper would remain behind to maintain appearances and provide misdirection should any pursuers come calling. Before they left, he pressed a small carved figure into Elizabeth's hand, a bear, fashioned from dark wood. "For courage," he explained. "Morning Skies people believe the bear lends its strength to those who honor it." The journey to the sheltered valley passed without incident, though all remained vigilant. By mid-afternoon, they had established a camp concealed within a dense grove of pine and aspen. A small stream provided fresh water, and natural rock formations offered protection from the wind that had grown increasingly bitter as November approached. As evening fell, Elizabeth and Thomas prepared for their mission to Silverton. They would travel light, No unnecessary equipment that might slow them or identify them as outsiders. Both dressed in the plain, practical clothing that would attract minimal attention in a mining settlement. "Remember," John instructed as they prepared, "to depart observation only. Do not engage directly with Crawford's men." 2 days, Thomas confirmed. "If we find nothing, we return and proceed to Pembina." Elizabeth embraced her sisters, holding each tightly for a moment longer than necessary. "Stay alert. Listen to John. And the others." "Be careful," Catherine whispered. "Crawford is dangerous when crossed." Rebecca pressed something into Elizabeth's hand, a small folded paper. "Open it when you need remembering," she said cryptically. With final preparations complete, Elizabeth and Thomas slipped away from camp as darkness settled fully over the landscape. They traveled by moonlight, Thomas leading with the confidence of one who could read the night as clearly as day. "We'll reach the observation point by dawn," he explained as they navigated the rugged terrain. "Rest today, then enter Silverton tomorrow evening when the miners return from their shifts." "How will we gather information?" Elizabeth asked. "We can hardly ask Crawford's men directly about the murder. Mining camps have their own source of knowledge," Thomas replied. "Saloons, laundresses, storekeepers, those who see everything but are often themselves unseen." They traveled through the night, speaking little but moving with growing synchronicity. Elizabeth realized she had adapted to frontier movement, placing her feet carefully, balancing on uneven ground, maintaining awareness of her surroundings. The refinements of Boston society seemed to belong to another lifetime. As promised, they reached the ridge overlooking Silverton as the first light touched the eastern horizon. The settlement sprawled below them, a haphazard collection of wooden structures dominated by the large mill building where ore was processed. Even at this early hour, smoke rose from its massive chimney. Mining operations never truly ceased. Thomas led her to a sheltered hollow where dense pines provided both concealment and windbreak. "We'll rest here today," he said, unpacking the small oilskin containing their provisions. As Elizabeth settled against a fallen log, her hand encountered the paper Rebecca had given her. Unfolding it carefully, she found a small, exquisitely rendered sketch, not of their family or their journey, but of Elizabeth herself, captured in a moment of determination during their confrontation with the boundary runners. Beneath the image, Rebecca had written a single line, "Who we become matters more than who we were." "Your sister has remarkable talent," Thomas observed, noticing the drawing over her shoulder. "She always has," Elizabeth agreed, carefully refolding the paper. "But this is different from her Boston landscapes. There's a strength in the lines now." "The frontier changes people," Thomas replied. "Some it breaks, others it reveals." They spent the day observing Silverton through Thomas's small spyglass, noting patterns of movement, identifying key buildings, locating Crawford's office. A substantial structure with a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Men came and went continuously, many carrying document pouches or equipment. By late afternoon, they had formulated their approach. Elizabeth would visit the settlement's small general store, where women were commonplace and gossip flowed freely. Thomas would observe the saloon, where miners often spoke more freely after a few drinks. "Crawford's foreman was killed 3 nights ago," Thomas reasoned. "The event will still be fresh in people's minds." As dusk gathered, they prepared to enter the settlement separately. Elizabeth had pinned her hair severely beneath a plain bonnet and wore her most practical dress, nothing to suggest education or refinement. "If you're threatened, return immediately to this position," Thomas instructed. "Don't wait for me." "And you?" Elizabeth asked. "I've moved through settlements like this many times," he assured her. "I'll be fine." Before they parted, Thomas surprised her by taking her hand. "Be careful, Elizabeth Miller. You've become—" He paused, seemingly searching for adequate words. "Important to all of us." The simple statement contained volumes of unspoken meaning. Elizabeth squeezed his hand in acknowledgement, then turned toward the path that would lead her into Silverton and a confrontation with the man who had attempted to purchase her and her sisters like cattle. As she descended toward the scattered lights of the settlement, Elizabeth reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. She had fled in terror less than a week ago, certain only of the need to protect her sisters from a terrible fate. Now she was walking deliberately toward danger, not just to clear their names, but to seek justice for wrongs that extended far beyond their own suffering. Behind her, Thomas watched until she disappeared among the first buildings, his expression revealing a concern that went beyond their mission. Then he too began his descent, taking a different path that would bring him to the settlement's rough edges, where his presence would draw less attention. Neither could have anticipated what awaited them in Silverton, revelations that would transform their understanding of Crawford's pursuit and forever alter the course of all their lives. Elizabeth entered Silverton with measured steps, careful to maintain the bearing of a miner's wife on an ordinary errand. The settlement bustled with early evening activity. Shift workers returning from the mines, supply wagons being unloaded, women calling children in for supper. Despite its rough-hewn appearance, Silverton had the structured rhythm of a community built around the relentless demands of mineral extraction. The general store occupied a prominent position on the main street, its windows illuminated by oil lamps that cast a warm glow against the gathering darkness. Elizabeth adjusted her shawl and bonnet before entering, mentally rehearsing the persona she'd adopted. Sarah Johnson, recently arrived from Minnesota, seeking supplies while her husband worked a claim. A bell jangled as she pushed open the door. Inside, the store offered the eclectic inventory typical of frontier establishments, tools and foodstuffs alongside fabric, medicine, and modest luxuries. The proprietor, a thin man with spectacles perched on a prominent nose, looked up from his ledger. "Evening, ma'am. Haven't seen you before." "Just arrived last week," Elizabeth replied, modifying her speech to eliminate any hint of her Boston education. "My husband's working the North Ridge claim." The shopkeeper's expression shifted subtly, interest mixed with something like sympathy. "North Ridge, Crawford territory." "That's right," Elizabeth confirmed, moving toward a display of fabric. "Need some heavy cotton for patching. Mining's hard on clothes." "Indeed it is, Mrs. Johnson. Sarah Johnson." As Elizabeth examined bolts of fabric, a woman emerged from the rear of the store, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, with the sturdy build of someone accustomed to physical labor. "Herbert, the coffee shipment needs checking," she told the shopkeeper, then turned to Elizabeth. "Don't believe we've met. I'm Margaret Wilson. My husband and I own this establishment." Elizabeth repeated her carefully crafted introduction. Mrs. Wilson's shrewd gaze suggested she missed little that happened in Silverton. "North Ridge," the older woman repeated. "Difficult area, particularly now." "Oh." Elizabeth affected innocent curiosity. "How so?" Mrs. Wilson glanced toward the door before lowering her voice. "Trouble there recently. Crawford's foreman was killed. Shot in the back 3 nights ago. Settlement's been on edge since." "How terrible!" Elizabeth gasped with practiced shock. "Do they know who did it?" "Crawford claims it was some women who escaped his employ." Mrs. Wilson's emphasis suggested she understood exactly what such employment entailed. "But Ellie, Baker, who does laundry for the company office, she says differently." Elizabeth's heart quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "What does she say?" "That there was a terrible row between Crawford and Foreman Jenkins that night. Voices raised, threats made. Then Jenkins rode out alone, and by morning, he was dead." Mrs. Wilson's mouth tightened. Crawford's blaming these women and their savage companions, but plenty wonder if it wasn't more domestic. This was precisely the information they had hoped to find. Elizabeth carefully steered the conversation, gleaning additional details while selecting items for purchase. Crawford and Jenkins had argued over money, specifically payment-related, to what Crawford called special acquisitions. Jenkins had apparently demanded a larger share. Crawford's got the territorial judge in his pocket, Mrs. Wilson concluded bitterly. Truth hardly matters when you own the law. Meanwhile, Thomas approached Silverton from the west, where miners' cabins stood in haphazard rows. He had darkened his face slightly with dirt, donned a miner's cap, and affected a slight limp, alterations that rendered him nearly unrecognizable. As the confident guide who had led the sisters through the wilderness, the saloon buzzed with activity. Thomas slouched at a corner table, nursing a whiskey he hadn't touched, ears attuned to the conversations flowing around him. Miners spoke freely here, loosened by alcohol and the camaraderie of shared hardship. Jenkins always was greedy, one bearded miner was saying, demanding extra percentage on every claim. Still, his companion replied, didn't deserve a bullet in the back. You believe Crawford's story about them women? A third asked. Seems convenient. Crawford's been strange lately, the bearded man observed. Obsessed with finding those sisters, offering rewards beyond reason. It's that document they took, another miner interjected, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial rumble. Worth more than all the silver in his mines, from what I hear. Thomas stilled, focusing intently on this unexpected revelation. What document? The bearded miner asked. Don't rightly know, came the reply, but Jenkins was holding it over Crawford somehow. Something about land rights, original deeds or treaties. Whatever it is, Crawford's desperate to get it back. Thomas remained in the saloon another hour, absorbing every scrap of information. The picture emerging was far different from what they had assumed. Crawford wasn't merely pursuing escaped property. He was hunting something specific he believed the sisters had taken, something valuable enough to murder for. As arranged, Thomas and Elizabeth met at midnight behind the abandoned assayer's office on Silverton's edge. They exchanged discoveries in hushed tones, each revelation adding new complexity to their situation. We never took any document, Elizabeth insisted. We fled with only our mother's jewelry and the clothes on our backs. Yet Crawford believes otherwise, Thomas mused. Enough to fabricate murder charges and pursue you beyond reason. Could Jenkins have hidden this document among our belongings, Elizabeth wondered. Perhaps as insurance against Crawford. Their speculation was interrupted by the approach of heavy footsteps. Thomas pulled Elizabeth into the shadow of a woodpile as two men passed nearby, mining company guards making their rounds. Doubling the patrols tomorrow, one was saying. Crawford says the sisters might be nearby. Waste of time, his companion grumbled. If I was them, I'd be halfway to Canada by now. Crawford's offering $500 each now, says he needs them alive. Once the guards passed, Thomas turned to Elizabeth, his expression grave. We need to return to camp immediately. Crawford's expanding his search. They slipped away from Silverton, traveling with heightened caution through the darkness. Both recognized that what they'd discovered changed everything. This wasn't simply about clearing their names. They had stumbled into something far larger, a conspiracy involving land rights that potentially explained the Thunder Eagle brothers' conflict with the mining operations. As they ascended toward their observation point, Elizabeth realized they now possessed pieces of a puzzle they didn't fully understand, but one that might provide leverage against the man who had threatened everything they valued. The missing document, whatever it contained, could be the key to not just their freedom, but justice for the Thunder Eagle family and perhaps many others harmed by Crawford's operations. All that remained was to discover what the document was, where it might be found, and how to use it to ensure their survival. Dawn painted the eastern sky in delicate strokes of pink and gold as Elizabeth and Thomas returned to camp. their expressions a mixture of triumph and concern. The others were already awake, tension evident in their postures. The Thunder Eagle brothers had maintained vigilant watches throughout the night, sensing the heightened danger their investigation had provoked. "Crawford killed his own foreman," Elizabeth announced without preamble as they gathered around the small fire. "And he's blaming us as a distraction from the real motive." She recounted the conversation with Mrs. Wilson while Thomas shared what he'd overheard in the saloon. The group listened in stunned silence, particularly when Thomas revealed the mysterious document that Crawford was so desperately seeking. John's brow furrowed deeply. "A document about land rights? Are you certain?" The miners spoke of original deeds or treaties, Thomas confirmed. "Something Jenkins was using to blackmail Crawford. But we took nothing," Rebecca protested. "Just our mother's jewelry case and—" "The strong box," Catherine interrupted, her normally quiet voice suddenly clear and decisive. All eyes turned to her. "What strong box?" Elizabeth asked, confusion evident in her tone. Catherine's face flushed slightly. "The night we fled, Father was unconscious from drink. When I took the money tin from beneath the floorboard, I found a small metal box I'd never seen before under his bed. I thought it might contain Mother's remaining jewelry, so I took it too." "You've had this all along?" Elizabeth's eyes widened in disbelief. Catherine nodded. "It was locked. In our haste to escape, I simply wrapped it in my spare clothing. When we found nothing valuable in Mother's jewelry case, I assumed the strongbox would be equally worthless." "Where is it now?" John asked urgently. Within minutes, Catherine retrieved the item from her modest pack, an iron box roughly 6 inches square with a sturdy lock. It bore no markings except a small etched number on its base. "Jenkins must have given this to Father for safekeeping," Elizabeth reasoned, turning the box in her hands. "Perhaps as insurance against Crawford. Father likely had no idea of its significance. Just another potential item to barter for whiskey, or perhaps he knew exactly what it was," Michael suggested. "Which would explain Crawford's immediate attempt to acquire you three after your father's gambling debt provided the opportunity." The implication hung heavy in the air that their father might have been complicit in Crawford's schemes, offering his own daughters in exchange for silence about whatever the box contained. "We need to see what's inside," Benjamin said, voicing what they all were thinking. John examined the lock carefully. "I can open this, but we should consider carefully what we do with whatever's inside. If it's valuable enough for murder, it's dangerous to possess." "We've already been accused of one murder," Elizabeth replied with quiet determination. "I'd rather know exactly what we're facing." James fashioned a pick from a metal file in his kit and with methodical patience worked the lock until it yielded with a satisfying click. The group held their collective breath as John lifted the lid. Inside lay several folded documents, yellowed with age but carefully preserved. John spread them reverently on a flat rock, his hands almost trembling. "Grandfather's mark," he whispered, pointing to a distinctive symbol at the bottom of one page. Thomas leaned closer. "These are the original boundary treaties, the true boundaries before the territorial government adjusted them to give mining companies access." "This map shows the original Lakota territories," John explained, indicating lines that encompassed land far more extensive than current reservations, including our grandfather's sacred prayer ground, where the main shaft of Black Eagle Mine now stands. As the group examined the documents, the full significance became clear. These were not mere historical curiosities, but legally binding agreements that had been systematically violated. With these original treaties, the Thunder Eagle family could challenge Crawford's claim to the land, potentially halting his operations entirely and requiring compensation for years of illegal mining. "Crawford built his entire empire on stolen land," Michael said, his voice tight with anger and vindication. "And Jenkins discovered these documents," Elizabeth added, the pieces falling into place. "He threatened Crawford with exposure." So Crawford killed him for it, Thomas concluded, then blamed you three to create a distraction while he searched for the documents. Rebecca, who had been studying the papers intently with her artist's eye for detail, looked up with sudden clarity. This is our salvation. These documents can clear our names and stop Crawford permanently. How do we use them? Catherine asked. We'd take them directly to the territorial governor in Bismarck, Rebecca proposed. Even if the local judge is corrupted, the governor would be forced to act on evidence this compelling. Bismarck is west, Michael noted. Far from our planned route to Pembina. John straightened, his decision evident in his posture. Bismarck it is. These documents represent justice, not just for the Miller sisters, but for our people and many others Crawford has wronged. Their plan formed quickly. They would travel west to Bismarck rather than continuing north to Pembina. The journey would be dangerous. Crawford's men would be watching all major routes, but the potential reward outweighed the risk. As preparations began for their departure, Thomas pulled Elizabeth aside, leading her to a quiet spot beneath a towering pine. We never imagined, when we first saw you three running from your homestead that night, that our paths would align so completely, he said, his normally stoic expression softened by something Elizabeth had come to recognize as tenderness. From on property to be sold to partners in justice, Elizabeth replied with a hint of wonder. Neither of us is who we were a week ago. Thomas took her hands in his. When this is over, when Crawford is brought to justice and your names are cleared, what do you wish for your life, Elizabeth Miller? The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither had dared voice until now. A week ago, I only wished for safety, she answered honestly. Now I find myself wanting something I never considered possible on the frontier. A life of purpose, perhaps even. She hesitated, unused to such directness. Happiness, Thomas suggested. A shared future? Elizabeth met his gaze steadily. Yes, though I never expected to find either running for my life through Dakota territory with a Lakota guide. Thomas smiled, a rare, full expression that transformed his features. Life follows unexpected trails. The wise traveler adapts to the path as it reveals itself. Similar conversations unfolded throughout the camp. Catherine and Michael sat beside the stream, heads bent together as they discussed medicinal practices that blended their different traditions. Rebecca showed Benjamin her latest sketches, plans for a series of illustrations documenting the Thunder Eagles' struggle for their ancestral lands. By midday, they were traveling west toward Bismarck, moving with renewed purpose. John devised a strategy to protect their precious evidence. The documents were carefully divided among them, no single person carrying all the proof, ensuring that even if someone was captured, Crawford could not reclaim everything. Their journey to Bismarck would span 4 days of hard travel across increasingly open country where concealment would be difficult. Yet as they rode beyond the shelter of the valley, Elizabeth felt something she hadn't experienced since before her father's disgrace. Hope, not just for survival, but for justice and a future of her own choosing. 3 weeks later, the Territorial newspaper published a front-page story that sent shockwaves throughout Dakota Territory. Mining magnate arrested Crawford, charged with murder, land fraud. The article detailed sensational revelations, how 3 sisters, wrongfully accused of murder, had presented territorial authorities with documents proving extensive land fraud. Crawford's subsequent arrest had revealed evidence of multiple crimes, including the murder of his own foreman. What the newspaper didn't record was the private meeting in the governor's office where Elizabeth Miller and Thomas Thunder Eagle had presented their evidence together, she articulating the legal implications with her Boston education. he providing testimony about the sacred lands that had been stolen from his family. Nor did it describe how Harold Miller, confronted by territorial marshals, had broken down and confessed his role in Crawford's scheme, how he had agreed to hold documents Jenkins had stolen from Crawford's safe, never imagining the danger he was placing his daughters in. In the aftermath, justice moved with unexpected swiftness. Crawford's mining operations were suspended pending full investigation. The territorial government, eager to avoid scandal that might delay statehood, moved to restore at least partial rights to the Lakota lands illegally seized. The Miller sisters, officially cleared of all charges, found themselves with unexpected options. Elizabeth declined an offer to teach at the territorial school, instead partnering with Thomas to establish a trading post at the crossroads between the white settlements and Lakota lands, a place where fair exchange could replace exploitation. Catherine's knowledge of medicinal plants, combined with Michael's traditional healing practices, led them to open a small apothecary that served both native and settler communities. Their marriage the following spring became a symbol of the bridge their family was building between worlds. Rebecca's artistic talents flourished under Benjamin's encouragement. Her illustrations of Lakota traditions and the changing frontier, published in Eastern newspapers, helped reshape perceptions of native peoples throughout the country. Their partnership, both professional and personal, produced works of lasting significance. Harold Miller, granted a second chance he scarcely deserved, embraced sobriety, and eventually became the unlikeliest advocate for fair treatment of native peoples, a man working to atone for past wrongs through humble service. As the harsh Dakota winter settled over the land, the extended Thunder Eagle Miller family gathered in their newly constructed home, a spacious lodge that incorporated elements of both cultures. Outside, snow blanketed the landscape in pristine white, covering the scars of mining operations, but not erasing them entirely. Healing, like justice, would take time. John Thunder Eagle, the eldest brother who had led them through their darkest days, raised a ceremonial pipe. To our grandfather, whose wisdom guides us still, may the land he loved heal under our care. To sisters who became warriors, Thomas added, his gaze meeting Elizabeth's across the fire. And to brothers who found partners worthy of their strength. Elizabeth smiled, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. They had been sold as property, hunted as fugitives, and transformed by necessity into forces of justice. 3 Boston sisters, refined by education but tempered by frontier hardship, had found not just safety, but purpose, and in the most unexpected place of all, they had found home. As the fire cast golden light across the faces of those gathered, Elizabeth recognized that their story was both ending and beginning. The document that had nearly cost them their lives had ultimately given them something far more valuable than safety. It had given them the chance to build a new world between the old ones, where different traditions could strengthen rather than oppose each other. Outside, the winter wind carried the distant howl of wolves across lands that would, with time and care, belong fully to neither settlers nor natives, but to a future they would build together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.